My name is Jennifer, and I'm Ugandan. And Chintu is my first novel. It's about really the history of Uganda, and history is told through a family from the 1700s to 2004. Now, it's about a chief in the 1700s who adopted a Rwandi's child and called him his son. And one time, as they traveled from the west of Uganda, by then Uganda didn't exist, it was Buganda Kingdom. And one day they were traveling with that son and a lot of servants and bodyguards. He killed this boy inadvertently. And unfortunately, because he was on a very long journey, which would take 3 months to go and to come back, by the time he came back home, the urgency had been lost, but also he lost courage to tell his family that this child had died, who unfortunately still had the dad from Rwanda. And just by intuition, the biological dad starts to suspect that something happened to his son. So he asked the chief, could you bring back my son? And he says, no, it's not going to happen. He says, okay, can you take me along next time you go to the city, to the capital, which was in Mengo at the time? And he said, no, that's not going to happen. And the biological dad said, is that because my son's dead? And he didn't answer. And he told him, okay, I'm going to look for him. But if my son is dead, you, your children, and their children, and their children's children will suffer. So the story then travels to 2004, and we see 4 descendants of Chintu, living under the curse from this man. So that's basically the story. Okay. Now, the excerpt I'm going to read is set not in the 1700s, in the current Uganda. And it's about a couple, an old couple, husband and wife, who are so religious, it's a sin to have sex. It's in the morning, and they are going out to sow the seed. Sowing the seed at the time was when you go to the taxi park or the bus park and you get on a bus, and once the bus takes off, you go, oh, praise God, God saved me. That's how they used to sow the seed. So I'm going to read that part just after they've got on a taxi. From his vantage view at the back of the van, Canaan watched as one by one passengers climbed in. He contemplated the reasons why these passengers had been chosen in particular. This could be a pertinent point to put to them. Why you? Why today? But then a thought intruded on him. Is this how those suicide bombers felt as their victims boarded the American planes? Did they sit there wondering, why him?
Sorry, can you speak louder?
Okay. Did they sit there wondering, why him? Why her? Why today? Canaan shook the thought out of his mind. He was vexed that his thoughts kept straying that morning. In any case, he and Faith were agents of life, not death. The last passenger hopped on the van, and as they drove out, Canaan felt Faith gearing up. He slipped the Bible into her hands. After 10 minutes of driving, when the passengers sat back to enjoy the cooling air wafting through the windows, Faith launched. Praise God, brothers and sisters. The air was stunned. Passengers' shoulders sagged. Thank God he saved me. Faiz clutched the Bible as if it was a battery powering her. God has sent me with a message for you. The passengers whimpered spontaneously. It was the whine of a people who had given up on anything good happening to them. I was a sinner, but he set me free. While other passengers decided to ride out the onslaught silently, a lad sitting a few seats away from Faiz turned and laughed. Why do you still look trapped? Rather than Faiz, the passengers vented their frustration on the lad. Faiz raised her voice above their annoyance. I was an evil woman. Faiz had a strong alto. The passengers glared at the lad, their eyes saying, see what you've done. But no one else seemed moved. Confession to evil was not potent anymore. People had hardened. Nonetheless, Faiz had cleared the field. Canaan wanted to see how he would plow. I was a slut. A woman sighed contentedly. I preferred married women. I aborted 3 of my unborn babies. A man cracked his knuckles, but the women were not moved. Shock had not worked. Canaan became anxious. Eventually, I settled down with one married man, but God punished me. I couldn't have children, and in a rage of envy, I killed his wife's children. Faiz paused for effect. All 3 of them. The passengers were still. It was a moment of balance. The passengers could believe her and get angry, or they might not, and laugh. Canaan sat on the edge of the seat praying that they would get angry. Wind whirled through the windows. No one knew about me. The children dropped off one by one, and within 5 years, the van's engines purred, and she had them. Canaan wanted to clap. I did, Faiz choked. And what for? Looking at her, Faiz was an old woman seeking respite from an old sin. Words came from far beyond pain. Because of a man? A mere man? Her lips trembled. Those children, I remember them, especially the little girl. They died because of... Words strayed away. After a measured pause of sniffing, Faiz infused her voice with optimism. But then I saw the light, and I confessed to my husband. He did not believe me, and I left him. However, God had other plans for me. He sent me another husband. I confessed to him as well, but he married me, and we have 2 children. Now I serve the Lord.
Hi, my name is Noviolet Bulawayo, and I'm very happy to be here. It's so amazing to see African writers and thinkers on the continent. It hardly doesn't happen quite often. We meet each other in New York, London, etc., and we are like 2-3 people in a room. So this is great, and thank you to the readers, and thank you to Lola for putting together this amazing. So we need new names very quickly. It's a coming-of-age story that follows a 10-year-old darling who is growing up at a time when her country is coming undone in a way that changes her everyday experience. In the midst of it all, she leaves for destroyed Michigan in the US to join her aunt. And of course, she gets there to realize that the American dream is not as rosy. I'm just going to read a short section on language. So this one afternoon, darling and her aunt are hanging out, and the aunt is trying to order a push-up bra on the phone. And this is how it goes. Aunt Fosterlina is busy trying to order a push-up bra on the phone, and you can hear that she and whoever she is speaking to are having issues. The problem with English is this: You usually can't open your mouth and it comes out just like that. First, you have to think what you want to say. Then you have to find the words. Then you have to carefully arrange those words in your head. Then you have to say this. When you get to the final step, something strange has happened to you and you speak the way a drunk walks. And because you are speaking like falling, it's as if you are an idiot, when the truth is that it's the language and the whole process that's messed up. And then the problem with those who speak only English is this. They don't know how to listen. They are busy looking at your falling instead of paying attention to what you are saying. I have decided the best way to deal with it all is to sound American, and the TV has told me just how to do it. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is watch Dora the Explorer, The Simpsons, SpongeBob, Scooby-Doo, and then you move on to That's So Raven, Glee, Friends, Golden Girls, and so on. Just listening and imitating the accents. If you do it well, then before you know it, nobody will ask you to repeat what you said. I also have my list of American words that I keep under the tongue like talismans ready to use. Pretty good, pain in the ass, for real, awesome, totally skinny, dude, freaking bizarre, psyched, messed up, like tripping, motherfucker, clearance, allowance, douchebag, you're welcome, acting up, yikes. The TV has also told me that if I'm talking to someone, I have to look him in the eye, even if it's an adult, even if it's rude. I don't know why Aunt Fostalina doesn't think to learn American speech like this, seeing how it would make her life easier, so she wouldn't have a hard time like she is right now. I said the Angel collection, Aunt Fostalina is saying. She has muted the TV and raised the volume on the handset so I can hear the other person as well. She sounds like a bored young girl. I'm sorry. What? I mean, I didn't quite hear that. Maybe it's my line. I can picture her head cocked, the young girl, a frown of concentration on her face. Angel, 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 and Fostalina says, raising her voice even louder. There is silence, like maybe the girl is getting ready to pray. Angel, and Fostalina adds helpfully, dragging out the word like she's raking gravel. I silently mouth, Angel, Angel. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean, ma'am, she says finally. You can tell from her voice that she's getting tired from trying to understand. What do you mean you don't know what I mean? You don't understand what I'm saying? Such a simple word, Aunt Fostalina says. She is speaking with her hands and head now, and I can tell from her knotted face that if the girl doesn't get it soon, it's not going to be good. I clear my throat to remind Aunt Fostalina that I'm in the room, so maybe she will ask me to speak for her, but she doesn't. Now she has scribbled the word angel all over the magazine, and the naked woman with the bra and underwear is all clothed in black ink, the letters like tiny angry insects. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think the first thing I want to discuss is dislocation and journeys and deracination, and it's to you. In We Need New Names, it's Darling who's, I think when we meet Darling is like 10. Why did you choose to locate the story of dislocation, of moving away from home, of a certain movement away from what should have been? We'll talk about Zimbabwe later, but why did you choose that? Why did you choose to locate the story in a child's voice? I mean, it's done a lot. Sade Adeniran also did it in Imagine This, and I think Nuruddin Farah in Maps. But is it easier for writers to show dislocation with children?
Okay. I wouldn't say it's necessarily easier, but I think the child narrator and the child perspective can allow for interesting things, can give the writer as a creative person interesting avenues that are not necessarily possible with an adult perspective. And for me, I think the shock of dislocation cannot be more pronounced than to young people, to children, especially because, I mean, they can see the context, but they are not able to totally understand what is going on. And Darling's First, I think it's important too to also acknowledge that Darling's first experience of dislocation is internal, in the sense that she loses her home first, right? And she is displaced from her normal space to this shanty town called Paradise. And there, of course, different dislocations are also happening at the same time. We know that her father leaves for South Africa, and other people are living at the same time. But I'm also interested in children as people whose voices are not normally heard. I think there's something to be said about the fact that this is an adult crowd. They are not active in our everyday. And in just following the story of how the narrative was playing out in Zim, I was just seeing pictures of kids, and the creator in me just became interested in their stories, because adults were speaking for themselves on Facebook, on the internet, etc. But I wasn't hearing from kids, and the project became about imagining what dislocation did to a young person. Yeah.
Thank you. In Chintu, I look at the dislocation as the curse having manifested in such a way as to move a whole clan and a people away from something. We are not quite sure what. All we know is that the curse happens and it has manifestations. Mm-hmm. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you view that kind of dislocation or alienation. And because you don't really resolve the curse, I'm not giving anything away, but how do you feel, how did you see that? Something that happens and it affects an entire set of people away from maybe they might have prospered better, I don't know, but how do you?
That's the toughest question I've ever been asked. I've never ever looked at the curse in Chintu as dislocating them from something and taking them somewhere else. I think as a writer, I just looked at this is the natural progression of this story because the curse has happened. So now I've got to think quite quickly. How were they dislocated? Because for some readers, they see the curse as colonization, mm-hmm. and that colonization dislocated Africa and dislocated Buganda, which used to, a kingdom that was Buganda becomes a country that is Uganda, which is a whole messed up entity entirely. But this curse happened before colonization. And in that way, then something was lost. They move away from what should have been a perfect life. Though Buganda at that time was not perfect. It was a good Buganda. It was a preferable, because, if we're doing things to ourselves, we'd rather do them. Not you coming and doing things to us. So there was a sense that Uganda, this thing, I don't even know what it was before. So Buganda Kingdom was on the way to somewhere. It was, according to the British, it was the most civilized part of Africa they had come across. And normally Ugandans are like, oh yeah, but of course that is very, very problematic. This was because Buganda had huge roads. We had a parliament and we had a kingdom, and there were checks and balances, which was similar to the British setting. So they say, oh my God, these are what they call noble savages, as opposed to the howling. It was already civilized in its own way, but it was on the way to somewhere, the way the British started 2,000 years ago, and they suffered all the serfs, the bad kings, the horrible prime ministers, and they evolved naturally, in tandem economically, socially, and culturally. So Buganda was going somewhere, and of course it was then hijacked. And now we are trying to be as good as the British. So that's the only way I can look at the dislocation.
I think we'll stay in was it the 1700s a
Yeah,
bit more. That journey that Chintu makes
Yes.
is really one of the most beguiling travel fiction I have ever read.
Thank you.
Just I can't describe it, people should read it, but I wanted to know how you wrote that, and as beguiling as it is, why, obviously you wanted to also write a book contemporary, but I marvel at how you were not seduced by that whole environment to stay there and make the whole book the 1700s.
That would be romanticizing our history, really, because I'm living in the present, and the present is quite ugly. But I did a lot of research. So those places that you read about in Chintu, they exist. So they travel from the border with Rwanda, and between Rwanda and Tanzania, and they travel to where Kampala is now. And in the middle, there's a kind of desert. It's not really a desert, but Uganda is so verdant that any tiny little thing that is not as verdant, we call it a desert. So there's that part of the journey where the boy died. And throughout my childhood, when people traveled from those who lived there to parts where I lived, the first thing they would ask them is, how was Orela? It's called Orela. Well-traversed, the Orela. It's like you would die there. But these days you drive through Orela. It's nothing to comment about. But it's through those oral traditions, the things people used to say to each other, but a lot of research. And the irony is that the research I did was mainly from books written by explorers, not by Ugandans. Because when the explorers came, they were interested, and they asked a lot about the history. So the first explorer came in the 1800s, but they write back to the 1700s, and that's the good thing about white people. They do their research. So if I hadn't immigrated to Britain, I wouldn't have had that history. It's all located in books written by white people in British libraries.
Thank you. No, Violet, so the first part of We Need New Names, it's obvious that Darling has an aunt abroad. I think so, yeah. And there is, amidst all the stuff that they are going through, there's a certain level of anticipation of leaving. Of course, everybody's anticipating it. But you never actually show the journey. Mm-hmm. Like, we go from being in paradise, and then the next day, the next sheet, she's in the United States. Why did you choose to omit that?
Because it's not necessary, I felt like it's understood. I don't remember exactly how the first section ends, but the fact that the next section starts with an arrival, it should be understood that she has made the journey, and especially as it has been looming large somehow. It's one of those writerly decisions you make. I was trying to play with what I could do as a creator, and also thinking of how a 10-year-old would process things. I feel like their lives are really kind of episodic. One moment I'm in Budapest eating guavas, the next moment I'm in the US. So I wasn't necessarily interested in the journey itself, but in what comes after it.
Okay. Both of you write very place-specific stories. I'll come to Chintu. Very place-specific, like very, the setting is quite clear. I wanted to discuss with you, Chintu is a very Buganda story. Beyond that, when we move away from 1700s, then it becomes Kampala. I mean, everything about Kampala, you describe it. And I always say that, I think lately there was some controversy between Chigozie Bioma and I think Igohosa, about stories and parochialness and blah, blah. But I believe that a local story well told is universal. I don't necessarily go for universal stories. I don't care. I just want stories that are well told. Did you ever worry? I mean, of course, later we find out you couldn't get a publisher abroad for a long time, but did you ever worry about whether people outside Uganda would take to the story? Was that ever a concern of yours, or did you really just want to write a really great, I mean, it's being called the Ugandan novel now. Is that what you wanted to achieve?
Actually, no one sets out to write the novel. It is very specific because I grew up in Uganda. I knew my novel will have problems finding a publisher in Britain or in America, but I wasn't writing for them. I was writing specifically for the Ugandan writer, from the Ugandan reader, the person that I was as a child, yearning to find myself in a book. So places were very, very important for me, and it was such a pleasure to go home and hear people saying, oh, I grew up here, and I could not believe this was in a novel. Oh, my grandmother lived there, and it was fantastic. I don't care what the West thinks. They don't. And the other thing you really need to realize is that, and I'm going to use a very Western imagery here. Now, the picture, it's art. It's the most famous woman, the Mona Lisa. It was drawn by somebody, and that woman looked at that person as he drew it. But every one of us, when we look at Mona Lisa, she's looking at us. That's what the novel is like. If you go to the novel, which has been written Okonkwo, okay? We study Nigerian literature so much that we know so much about you, more than you know about yourselves. But that Ugandan was absent. So for me, I believe that if I write my novel very well, if, for example, I saw myself in Okonkwo, one time my dad came back and I followed him around, wondering whether he was an Okonkwo. If I could see that myself in that novel, other people, if I write with all my heart, other people will see themselves in my novel. If they don't, that's not my problem.
Thank you.
That's important.
That's important, yes. So I want to, with We Need New Names, the setting, you never quite say whether it's Bulawayo or Harare, by the way, or did we get that sense? I did not. But there is paradise, and paradise is a specific place beset with a set of problems. So that's how I identified paradise. There is I know in Stone Virgins, Yvonne Vera's book, there's a nice passage there where she's describing, I think, going around Bulawayo. There's a scene there. Anyway, I digress. But what I wanted to talk to you about is, talk to me about paradise. Okay. Because it's paradise could be a of paradise. Okay.
I just wanted to quickly come back to Jennifer's comment. I think it's so beautiful how you put it, that I'm paraphrasing here, that it's necessary for readers to see themselves and to see their spaces in works we produce. And that's one of the things that I loved about your novel. Now, with names, I feel like I kind of faked place. You are right, I don't mention Bulawayo or Harare. I also don't mention Zimbabwe as well. And part of why I made that choice was because I felt like that story was not a Zimbabwean story. I mean, the story of a country falling apart, you know, it has happened and it has been happening and it's gonna happen. And I didn't want people to just comfortably say, oh, that's a Zimbabwean. You know, I wanted I wanted it to remain open. Now, Paradise is a space where there's irony in the name, right? It's exactly the opposite of paradise. It's hell. We have like Darling and a group of friends running loose, almost without parents, in a sense. Because the parents are rendered helpless. The father is, for the most part, away. When he comes back, he's sick. The mother is hustling. The men are jobless. They sit under a tree and play drafts all day long. The children are unminded. There are some morsels of, hope, I guess. At the time, there's a scene, I think, around the time of the elections where people get mobilized and they look forward to things changing, but then all those hopes are dampened. But I also want to say it's not all bleak. I think the presence of the children themselves kind of tries to speak to this sense of life. I think Darling and Bastard and Chipo, and God knows, Chipo who's pregnant is still a hard story. But the fact that she's carrying the future of the space and the country, I think is my own way of saying that even in this bleak space, there's some light. It's hard to see, but it is there. Especially when you get to the end of the novel and Chipo assumes this position of she's morally, she's in a position of moral superiority in a way. She stayed. She didn't have the chance or the means to escape. Darling did. But at the end of the novel, a question can be asked in terms of, who comes out better. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that you didn't particularly want it to be viewed as a Zimbabwean story, because that's exactly what I did. I viewed it as, but also because she and I were talking at breakfast. I finished high school in Zimbabwe, and I think, in fact, I know the chapter in the novel that really upset me was how they lived.
How they left, okay.
Yeah, the thing is how they lived, right? The part where you talk about people leaving. Okay. Yeah, and as as I was telling you at breakfast, when I was in Zimbabwe, and my mother and I had gone there as a means of escaping Ghana, there wasn't any sense that anyone or any of my classmates were ever going to leave Zimbabwe. There wasn't, there was some, upheavals here and there, but the mass exodus and so when I read how they lived, I interpreted it solely as, although, I come from Ghana and Kenya, and people have left since time immemorial, but I read it as a very heartbreaking Zimbabwean phenomenon that had happened particularly to my generation of people. And so can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely, and to mine as well. Even though I left in 1999 December, before the crisis hit, so it was a different country. And yeah, growing up, especially my generation who were born right after independence, we never would have imagined this Zimbabwe of now. And I think that's what kind of messes us up. When I compare myself to my nieces and nephews who were born in the midst of it, it's said that that's all they know, really, so that they don't understand me when I come and say, hey, things used to be like this and like this and like this. But the phenomenon of people living in droves is an old one. It has always happened. What is heartbreaking, though, is that we have to wonder what would happen if people stayed and fought. And I think that's Again, coming back to the end of the novel, that's part of Darling and Chipo's fight, because Chipo says something like, you left Darling, you left the house burning, and now you have the audacity to call and talk to me in that accent that's not even yours, that this is your country. So it's something, personally, it gives me this sense of guilt, because the reality is that a country does not build itself. A country is its people. And I'm kind of saddened by the fact that the easiest thing to do is just to pack up and say, fuck this shit, I'm leaving, you know? And if we continue to do that for generations and generations, I think we are leaving behind a situation where our leaders feel like, hey, we can do anything because these people don't care. Yeah.
Thank you. So Jennifer does some, in fact, you do as well. We're talking about politics now because, you know, African novel politics. But you do something amazing in what is really an epic story from 1700s. Number one, you do not discuss colonialism. But also politics, there's only like a section where I think 2 or 3 men are talking about Idi Amin. I mean, there is no discussion really about Idi Amin. There's no discussion about Obote. But then it's a Ugandan story. Did you go out of your way to minimize politics?
Yeah, that was very, very intentional.
Okay.
First of all, I was so anti-post-colonial stuff when I wrote this novel. So I incise that time when we were colonized out of the story. Because you write such a novel and it goes out, people focus on the colonization as if there was nothing else going on. And this is a novel that tries to retrieve history before the coming of Europe, you know, because there is that notion that Africa didn't have a history. And we have played along with it by writing novels mainly that start with colonization to the present. And it's my dream that all the history that we've studied about Africa, you know, especially the West Africa, in Uganda we study West African history, so we've done all your empires, Benin, and you know, the Sundiata, the Mansa Musa, Mansa Ali, so all those figures of history, you know, I would have loved to see them coming out. And then I cut out the politics, because the major politics is Idi Amin. And I'm telling you, Idi Amin is big. He was a big person, but he had a big personality. But you put him in your novel and he's going to take up all the space, because there's so much to say and there's still so much interest that the things that I wanted to talk about will disappear, you know. So I wanted to talk about who we were before. And okay, there was that colonization, but who are we now? Can I talk about Uganda without referencing Britain and America? You know, I definitely wanted to have those out of the way. And this is why the book is finding problems, you know, being published in the West, because the West, and all of us, we want to see ourselves in text. We look for ourselves. So when the West reads African text, they're looking for themselves, and therefore they're ignoring us. So look at Things Fall Apart. The part where colonizers arrive is very small, I swear. The book is about Okonkwo and how he related to his children, how he related to his, you know, and his fear. All that is pushed out of the way, and it's colonization. I said, this is not happening to my novel.
Thank you. And I want to ask you also, because Paradise is really, I think, a product of Mugabe politics, which you don't also really talk about, except for that brief chapter on the elections, but then you don't even talk about the candidates. There's just this thing called change. So why did you also do that?
Because I was interested in the lives of ordinary people. You know, I felt like giving Mugabe page time, especially if we knew what the picture was kind of doing a disservice to where to my characters and to where I wanted the story to go. Yeah, and you also trust the reader to kind of get it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's so much I could be asking. I could be here all day, but questions.
Oh,
We have time.
Yes, that's fast.
There.
Zakari, I just want to ask, what is the function of names in the text? We need new names. That's all.
Yeah.
I don't know. What is the function of names? I didn't say to give them a specific function, but one thing I wanted to do was celebrate the fact that I come from a place of colorful names. It upsets me when you hear Africans say things like, well, this book was written for white people, look at the names, and then yesterday, this shirt, I got this shirt from a lovely friend, Facebook friend. His name is Thank God. Thank God. And of course, I felt like in as much as the book is what it is, and it's it came from even with its politics, it also needed to be a celebration of my culture. And names was one way I wanted to do that. But of course, amazing readers and critics are finding ways of making sense of that choice, and I'm happy with it. Yeah.
Next question. No, there's someone back there.
My name is Michael, and then we had a discussion on the book a while ago, and I just want to share some of the reactions with you. First, I want to ask the question. In the final parts of the novel, there was like a moral argument, you just mentioned it now, between Chipo and Darling about Chipo running away when it mattered most. Darling running away when it mattered most. And Chipo was telling her, well, you don't run away when your house is on fire. I just want you to tell me your impression about people who run off when the going is bad. The same thing happened to Darling's father. He had to run away at some point, and then he came back to die in the house, and then he had this whole effect on the family and all. So when Darling ran off and Chipo was trying to tell her, well, I'm better off than you because I stayed behind. You left. You don't have any right to tell me about paradise or anything. You don't have anything to say anymore. That question feeds into something someone else said a while ago on social media. The person came up one day and said, well, those who can change Africa are those who have been outside Africa because they've seen better ways that things can be done. Do you agree with that concept?
That's your question.
Yes.
So many things said there. Who can change Africa? I think all of us can change Africa. Those who left and those who are here. Nobody owns it. It's ours. And in terms of running away, people live in search of greener pastures, and that's a legitimate reason. But at the same time, we also need to think about the costs there. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes? One more here. And then
for Jen, please, I'm tired.
ask Jennifer a question.
Hi, my question is for Jennifer. I was wondering how you were able to, your work is historical fiction, and how you are able to write about something that happened in the 18th century, how you were able to replicate the way they spoke, the way they, the characters, the way they spoke, the way they, related with each other. Their foods are different from the kind of food we eat now. How were you able, was it all research, or did you, how were you able to replicate all that?
Okay. It was three things. It was basically mainly imagination. It was oral Ugandan traditions. And it was also books that I researched. You don't realize, but as you grow up, you in your ears, things that used to happen in the past are being said around you by your parents, by your grandparents, on radio. Somehow when you start writing, your mind helps you to retrieve these aspects and you add it to your imagination. But of course I added it to imagination. One, we had some books, for some reason, when in early colonization, the British encouraged Ugandans to write in our traditional languages. This was a fantastic thing because there are certain books written in the 20s, the 30s, which of course does not look at colonization, which is unaware of colonization. So they go back in the past. Sometimes they don't even say it's the past. But when I was young, some of those books used to be read by my grandfather aloud, and he would read a part, and you just imagine this darkness, this past, And so that also helped me. But I did a lot of research, and I did research for 10 years. And of course, I looked back in oral traditions and my imagination.
10 years?
Yes.
Okay.
One last one that says, the gentleman with the suit or whatever.
Hello everyone, my name is John. I don't know if I offended these guys with the mic. I've been raising my hand for 10 years and they've not answered me. I have 2 questions. One.
Choose the best one. One.
I beg you.
I will take one, or you can sit down.
All right. This is about research. To Jennifer, she said one thing that helped her in her research was that you migrated to abroad, and then you laid your hands on documents about your setting. So the question is, how much should we do research? Like, if I want to write about New York, and do you encourage I travel to New York, considering the size of the pocket of the person in question? Or if you hadn't traveled, do you think you'll be able to write well your story how it is? Thank you.
Okay, when you ask that if you wanted to write about New York, should you immigrate to New York? You might as well ask me if you wanted to write about the 1700s, should you immigrate to the 1700s? It's not like that. It helps if you're going to write about New York to have been there and see it, because it's a specific place. But I wanted to write about a time, okay? And because Africa does not have that kind of written history, especially in Uganda, it allowed me to use my imagination. So right now, my book is used as a kind of history. But I know that I took license with some of that history. Some of the things I said did never happen. I won't tell you what. But, remember, this history comes with imagination. And also, the history itself is not a major aspect of my novel. My novel is fiction. History is something that I use to tell my story. So as I'm telling the story, and this history is standing in my way, and it's not allowing me to tell my story properly, I'm going to twist it. Okay, so yes, it is important that you do your research, but you've got to decide how much of that research is going to drive your story. I personally do not use research to tell the story. I tell my story first and then use research, because otherwise, if you use research, it will take you in directions you didn't intend to go. Okay, so you have to hold hard on the research and let the story guide it.
Thank you to Jennifer, and thank you to No Violet, and thank you for listening. We'll end here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for the heat. We're trying to do everything we can to see if we can get some ACs in here. I told you earlier there was a bit of a surprise, and it's an Etisalat surprise. So if you hurry up and get to that space, you'll be able to get all the books on the long list for 1,000 naira. Don't forget to buy your books. Andrew Walker, No Violet Bulawayo, Kintu by